For all its beauty and splendor, the wilderness can be a cruel teacher. Off-roading gives you freedom, the kind that comes when the pavement ends and the world belongs only to you and the machine beneath you. The air smells cleaner, the sky looks harder and closer. You find yourself in places no highway could ever bring you. Out there you are small, but alive. But the road will punish you, even the skillful. A tire slips, a trail crumbles. A moment's mistake, and the mountain takes you. Out there, rescue is not certain. Out there, a wrong turn is not a story, it is an ending. Let's venture back to the savage wilderness where survival is earned, not given. This is Outdoor Disasters. For Matthew Yeoman and Stacey Tourout, their off-roading adventure would be catastrophic. The town of Nanaimo, British Columbia, sits on the edge of the Pacific, a place where cedar forests tumble down to the sea and ferry horns cut across the morning fog. It was here that Matthew Peter Yeomans and Stacey Tourout built their lives. Not in the traditional sense. No neat mortgage, no quiet suburban evenings, no tidy weekend routines, but in the restless way of wanderers. They were both in their early 30s, full of the fire that comes with believing the world is wide and that your time in it should not be squandered. When Matthew met Stacey, she was inspired and enthralled by his carefree attitude. She was more conventional in her thinking, but found herself lost in Matthew's dreams about a life of adventure. Matthew and Stacey began dating in 2019, but the seed of their great adventure was planted 2 years earlier. In 2017, Matthew traveled to Oregon to watch a solar eclipse. The experience left him awestruck and determined to see another, this time in Argentina, in 2020. The COVID-19 pandemic derailed that plan, yet it sparked a new idea. If they couldn't fly there, what kind of vehicle would it take to drive? They envisioned a machine that could handle remote backroads, a rugged 4x4 tough enough for off-road expeditions but also comfortable enough to live in. Nothing on the market fit their vision, so they decided to build one. Matthew was a builder of things. He had the hands of a mechanic, strong and scarred, and the mind of a dreamer, always sketching plans for something new. Old trucks, forgotten trails, maps spread across the kitchen table, that was his language. Stacey was different yet complementary. Her energy was sharp and luminous. Where Matthew sometimes drifted into quiet, Stacey filled the silence with laughter and bright-eyed conviction. Together, they were a balance, each pushing the other toward the edges of the map. They weren't celebrities at first. Just a couple with a used camera, a Toyota truck, and the audacity to believe that people might care about their story. In 2020, they launched a small YouTube channel called Toyota World Runners. The name said it all. They would run the world with Toyotas, those stubborn machines that could be coaxed into places most vehicles had no right to go. The videos were rough at first, consisting of handheld clips stitched together in the late-night hours. But the core was there, the charm of two people in love, chasing something bigger than themselves. What set them apart wasn't polish, but sincerity. When they laughed on camera, it was real. When they broke down in the middle of nowhere, you saw the grease under Matthew's fingernails, Stacey's exasperation turning into a grin as they found a way forward. Their story was not that of untouchable adventurers, but of ordinary people daring to do extraordinary things. Slowly, subscribers found them. 10,000 became 50, 50 became 100. By 2025, they would have more than 200,000 people following their journeys. But the numbers weren't the point. What mattered was the dream. The same one Matthew and Stacey talked about on long drives through Vancouver Island forests, the Pan-American Highway. From the cold north of Canada to the windswept tip of Argentina, the longest road in the world, a line across the spine of the Americas through deserts, jungles, and mountains. It would be their proving ground, their pilgrimage, and their story to tell. The problem was the vehicle. You don't take a stock SUV through the Andes or across Patagonian rivers. You need something tougher, stranger, built with equal parts stubbornness and imagination. To fund the project, which would eventually cost over $25,000, Stacey relied on income from her cleaning business, while Matthew flipped Toyota trucks for profit and worked on videography projects. They also took out a loan to make their dream a reality. That's how Sunday was born. The project began with a 1976 Toyota Chinook, a strange little fiberglass camper once sold to weekend warriors in bell-bottom jeans. The Chinook was never meant for the kind of terrain Matthew and Stacey had in mind. It was a two-wheel drive relic, fragile and outdated. The camper's pop-up roof and functional living space made it a good starting point, but the drivetrain was far from capable. But Matthew saw possibility where others saw junk. With his friend Jason LaPointe, a fellow overlanding fanatic, he decided to graft the Chinook body onto the skeleton of a 1996 Toyota Land Cruiser, a machine built for punishment. Under the hood went an engine from a first-generation Toyota Tacoma. The project was unconventional. 100-day builds usually belong to professional shops with deep pockets, not a couple scraping savings into parts bins. But Matthew was relentless. He and Jason pulled apart frames in greasy garages, cutting and welding, lifting and reinforcing. Stacey filmed the chaos, narrating the moments when Matthew forgot bolts or cursed at rusted steel. She wasn't just a passenger. She was part of the crew, sanding, painting, and dreaming alongside him. When it was done, they had something no one else on Earth did: a 4x4 mini RV with a camper's soul and a warrior's bones. They christened it Sunday. Cream-colored, lifted, and humming with a V6 heart, Sunday was both home and companion. In videos, you can see Stacey running her hand along its side like one might touch a beloved horse. This was not just a vehicle, it was their third partner, their shield against deserts and storms, their stage for telling the story. In 2022, they set off south. From British Columbia, they dropped through the United States, crossed into Mexico, and didn't stop until the road ended in Ushuaia, Argentina, 17 months and 17 countries later. It was not smooth. Sunday broke down more than once, stranding them on desolate highways where Matthew crawled under the chassis while Stacey hunted down food. Fuel pumps failed in the Andes, tires blew in deserts. Yet every disaster turned into content, and every fix into proof that they could keep going. The landscapes they captured were cinematic. Volcanoes in Guatemala, jungles in Costa Rica, the high passes of Peru where the air was thin and the stars pressed down like ice. And always, there was the laughter, the inside jokes, the weary smiles after a long day of driving, the way they clung to each other when storms battered their fiberglass walls. Their audience grew not just because of the places they went, but because of the way they seemed to love each other more with every mile. Not every mile of their journey was romantic or safe. Traveling through unfamiliar countries meant passing through regions where they stood out as easy targets. In Colombia, two teenagers approached them. One pulled a knife. Matthew managed to scare him off and no harm was done, but the moment underscored just how vulnerable they could be. More than once, locals warned them bluntly, "You're going to die out here." It was never clear if the warnings meant death by violence or by the road itself, probably both, and they weren't wrong. The couple brushed against death more than once. Yet in their videos, Matthew and Stacey spoke openly about those risks. They didn't deny them, but neither did they dwell on them. The danger was simply part of the life they had chosen, and it never seemed to shake them. Still, danger has a way of keeping score. The road is patient, and sooner or later, it comes to collect. April 2024 would be a day they would never forget. After 17 months on the road, they finally stood at the base of Fitzroy in Patagonia, the jagged spires burning in the last light of sunset. They had made it. Their dream of reaching the southern tip of the world realized at last. In that moment of triumph, Matthew turned to Stacey. He had forgotten the ring back in Canada, but that didn't matter. With a marker, he drew a simple band on her finger and asked her to marry him. The mountain towered above them. It was imperfect, improvised, and utterly theirs. A proposal written in ink, sealed in love, beneath one of the wildest peaks on earth. She said yes. The video of that moment spread across their channel like wildfire. It wasn't polished or scripted. It was raw, human, perfect in its imperfection. As Matthew later wrote, "The moment was perfectly us." When they returned to Canada in 2025, they were greeted not just by family, but by a community of fans waiting for the next chapter. On the road south, Matthew and Stacey learned quickly that adventure is not free. It demands sweat, patience, and sometimes pain. For a while, they rested. They edited hours of footage, stitching their memories into a series of videos documenting their 17-month journey, garnering millions of views across the multiple videos. Comments flooded in from around the world. Families planning their own trips, young couples dreaming bigger. Some fans said it was the best travel film they had ever seen, not because it was flawless, but because it was human. But restlessness doesn't fade so easily. By the spring of 2025, Matthew and Stacey were already chasing their next horizon. South America was behind them. They had driven to the bottom of the world in Argentina, and now another dream was pulling them farther still. New Zealand was calling, a place of mountains and fjords, deep forests and wild coasts, where every road seemed to lead into myth. The plan was as bold as it was unconventional. Matthew would fly to New Zealand, buy an old Toyota off the local market, and with the help of a Kiwi friend, rebuild it into an off-road rig in a week's time. No frills, no drawn-out project, just the kind of fast, resourceful work that had always defined the Toyota World runners. To their delight, the plan went off without a hitch. Within days, the truck was ready, and the couple set off to see how far they could push it. For the next month, they roamed across both islands. They rattled over gravel passes where clouds curled down to the valleys, forded icy rivers that cut through sheep country, and camped in places where the stars burned sharp enough to make them ache. The roads were rough, often nothing more than tracks carved into hillsides, but that was what they loved most. Stacey filmed Matthew steering through mud holes and washouts. Matthew caught Stacey's laughter when the truck lurched and splashed through riverbeds. It was a different adventure from Patagonia or the Andes, but it carried the same spirit: remote trails, uncertain outcomes, and the joy of living on the edge of the map. New Zealand gave them another month of freedom, another chapter in a story they thought would go on forever. When they returned home, they explored closer to home. Vancouver Island's back roads became their playground again. They camped in familiar forests and watched sunsets from cliffs that had been theirs long before they started their YouTube channel. For once, they weren't chasing a deadline or a border crossing. They were just living, breathing, savoring. What no one knew, what Matthew and Stacey themselves could not know, was how little time they had left. The mountains they loved, the trails that gave them freedom, would soon turn against them. In just a few weeks, their story would take a shocking and tragic turn. On August 7, 2025, Matthew and Stacey were embarking on their next adventure. This time, they were traveling along a rugged backcountry trail near the small settlement of Tourout Lake in the West Kootenay region of British Columbia, roughly 600 kilometers or 400 miles northeast of Vancouver. Predictably, they were seeking another story to film, another place where adventure lived in dust and danger. They weren't alone. Friends from the off-road community, other Toyota diehards, camera carriers, and road romantics were with them that day, a convoy climbing up Silver Cup Ridge near Tourout Lake in the West Kootenays. It's the kind of place Matthew loved. It asked for precision. It punished error. The road narrowed on a curve. Dust hung in the air from the rigs ahead, settling slowly on the pines below. What exactly happened will never be known, but rescuers pieced together the aftermath. It hasn't been confirmed if they were driving on Sunday, since Matt owned a few off-roading Toyotas. Their rig left the road, nose tipping toward empty air. The embankment below was a steep chute of rock and scree, a 200-meter or 650-foot drop without trees to break the fall. Perhaps Matthew was driving, his hands tight on the wheel, his instincts honed from years of navigating back roads. Maybe Stacey had taken a turn behind the wheel. She often did, proud to show that she wasn't just along for the ride. Either way, they were experienced, careful, but mountain roads are merciless. Maybe the road crumbled. Mountain trails erode under rain, gravel shifting like marbles beneath tires. One wheel might have slid off the edge, and in that instant gravity made the decision. Maybe the dust blinded them. With a convoy ahead, a fog of grit could have hidden the true edge of the track. What appeared to be solid ground may have been nothing but air. Maybe a mechanical failure struck. A snapped tie rod, a failed brake, or even just the weight of its lifted frame, leaning at the wrong angle, could have set disaster in motion. Or maybe it was just bad luck. A rock in the wrong place, a glance away at the wrong time. Adventure often rides the thin line between triumph and tragedy. When the SUV tipped, there was no chance to recover. Witnesses told rescuers it rolled violently, end over end, bouncing off boulders as glass shattered and steel screamed. Some said it tumbled more than half a dozen times before it came to rest in ruins. For those seconds inside the cab, the world would have been a storm of violence. Metal crushing, gear flying, the unbearable weight of gravity slamming bodies against belts or windows. Rescuers later said Matthew was found with no vital signs at the scene. The violence of the rollover likely killed him instantly. Shockingly, Stacey was still alive, thrown clear of the wreckage. Perhaps she wasn't belted in, or perhaps the sheer force tore her from her seat. She was found away from the wreck, staggering, disoriented, with blood on her face. A rescuer remembered, she didn't realize quite how injured she was. Severe head trauma has a way of masking itself, the body moving on in shock even as life slips away. Their friends scrambled down the slope, hearts pounding, shouting their names. Dust still hung in the air. They must have known immediately this was beyond them. One of the convoy ran down the mountain until, by sheer luck, he flagged a Caslo search and rescue manager who happened to be nearby. The alarm went out at 6:30 p.m. From Nakusp, a helicopter lifted into the evening sky. SAR ground teams bounced up the trail in ATVs, hauling ropes and stretchers. An RCMP constable made the trek too, climbing into the mountains as twilight deepened. It was a race against time, but time was already the enemy. Rescuers rappelled to the wreck. They found Matthew first. There was nothing to do. Stacey was alive, though barely. Her skull fractured, her thoughts scattered. She was still moving, still trying to make sense of the world. They cradled her, stabilized her, and loaded her onto a stretcher. Within 15 minutes of arrival, she was strapped into the helicopter. The blades chopped the thin air, lifting her out of the mountains toward Nakusp. Maybe for a moment there was hope. Maybe her friends looked up at that helicopter and believed she would pull through, that this wouldn't be the end of their story. Stacey had always been tough, always resilient. If anyone could survive, it would be her. But head injuries are thieves. They rob quietly, steadily, while the body fights on. At the hospital that night, Stacey slipped away. By the time the August sky went dark, both Matthew and Stacey were gone. What had begun as a love story on remote roads, a fairy tale of two dreamers trading houses and office chairs for a camper in the open horizon, had ended. They had built a life from dust and distance, stitching together their romance with sunsets, campfires, and the endless hum of tires on forgotten trails. But all of it, the laughter, the miles, the belief that the road could stretch on forever, was cut short in an instant, folded into the cruel brevity of tragedy. For 2 days after the accident, the world knew nothing. In Nanaimo, Matthew's family waited for calls that didn't come. In Newfoundland, Stacey's mother stared at her phone, uneasy, but not yet knowing why. Fans online wondered why the channel had gone quiet. People assumed Matthew and Stacey were simply filming another stretch of backcountry cut off from signal. But through a Facebook post from Stacey's mother, they heard the shocking news. It is with unimaginable heartache that we share Matthew and Stacey tragically succumbed to injuries in an off-road accident on August 7, 2025 in the beautiful mountains of British Columbia that they loved so much. Please keep our family in your thoughts and prayers as we navigate this devastating end to an amazing love story. They are together forever as we knew they would always be. The post spread quickly, shared by friends, then strangers, and eventually by fans who screenshotted it and posted it on Reddit, Instagram, and YouTube comments. Within hours, the small grief of a family became the large grief of a community. By the morning of August 12th, journalists were calling Kaslo search and rescue, demanding confirmation. They received it in the form of a plain statement. Yes, a man and woman in their early 30s from Nanaimo had died in a single vehicle rollover near Silver Cup Ridge. Yes, they were known content creators. Yes, one had died on scene, and the other later in the hospital. News spread, first locally, then worldwide. The coverage flattened their complexity into a headline, but behind those headlines in the comment sections, the grief was textured and real. On YouTube, their last video and their last post on Instagram turned into a shrine. Strangers wrote as if addressing close friends. "We never met you, but you changed our lives." On Reddit's overlanding forums, the tone was different but equally raw, expressing how amazing their adventures were. Others shared practical reflections, discussions about seatbelts, about trail safety, but even those posts carried the weight of sorrow. Adventure lovers are a pragmatic bunch. They mourn by looking for lessons, hoping the next life can be saved by what this one lost. Perhaps the most powerful tributes came from those who had known Matthew and Stacey personally, or had traveled with them and fellow YouTubers in the off-roading community. Back in Nanaimo, the loss was heavier, quieter. Neighbors put flowers on the Tourout family's porch. Friends stopped by the Yeoman's driveway to hug Matthew's father. At the West Can Overland shop where Jason LaPointe had helped build Sunday, the rig that had carried them across a continent, employees stood in silence around the garage. The memory of those 100 frantic build days lingered in the smell of oil and steel. Beyond the travel and YouTube fame, what struck most people was the love. Matthew and Stacey's story was not just about landscapes, but about partnership. Their engagement at Mount Fitzroy became iconic. But their legacy is not only one of inspiration, it is also one of caution. The margin of error is always zero. They lived fully, but the cost was real. Their fans are left to wrestle with that paradox, to be inspired by their courage and yet sobered by their fate. The mountain held them for a moment, and then it let them go. That is the way of the wilderness. It gives you beauty and freedom, and in the same breath, it reminds you that neither is free. The road revealed their love, their patience, their stubbornness, and their faith in each other. And in the end, it also revealed the fragility of it all. While others stayed in offices and neighborhoods, they packed their lives into a 30-year-old truck and chased a line across the spine of the world. They believed that a life measured by comfort is no life at all. To honor Matthew and Stacey is to learn from their end. What is certain is this: Matthew and Stacey lived the way they wanted to. They loved each other without hesitation. They turned their lives into a story worth telling. And though it ended too soon, that story is now part of something larger. It belongs to all who watched, all who dreamed with them, all who will one day step into an old truck and chase the horizon because Matthew and Stacey showed it could be done. The mountains took them, but the world keeps them. In memory, in film, in love. On YouTube, their channel remains, a digital campfire still burning. The videos are a record of two people refusing to let fear dictate their choices. In the Pan-American movie, the chronicle of their 17-country journey, Matthew's voiceover states, "Don't get lost in believing anything is possible. Believe in one thing so much that impossible doesn't even come close." When off-roading, the joy is in the risk, the beauty is in the danger. The roadless world is honest. It gives nothing easily, but it gives what the cities cannot: silence, freedom, truth. If you love it, you must respect it. If you don't, it will break you. And even if you do, it may still take you. That is the price of going where others will not. Off-roading in remote wilderness is about preparation as much as adventure. Before setting out, know your terrain. Study maps, GPS coordinates, and recent trail reports, because once you leave service zones, you cannot rely on a phone to save you. Always tell someone where you're going and when you expect to return. That single step has saved countless lives when things go wrong. Your vehicle is your lifeline. Treat it accordingly. Inspect your tires, fluids, and recovery gear before every trip. Carry more fuel than you think you'll need, and bring spare parts for the things most likely to fail. Belts, hoses, fuses, and a tire repair kit. Equip yourself with recovery gear such as tow straps, a jack, traction boards, and a winch if possible. A vehicle can be pulled from mud or sand, but only if you've planned for it. Supplies matter as much as equipment. Pack extra food and water, enough to last days beyond your planned journey. Weather can change fast in the wilderness. Layers, rain gear, and emergency blankets can make the difference between discomfort and danger. A first aid kit is non-negotiable, and so is the knowledge to use it. Travel with respect for the land and your limits. Off-road trails can be deceptive. One wrong angle on a slope, one careless descent, and a day's adventure can become a disaster. Drive slowly, stay buckled, and scout obstacles before attempting them. If you are in a convoy, communicate clearly and never leave a vehicle behind. Alone, you are vulnerable. Together, you are safer. Finally, carry a way to call for help when everything else fails. A satellite phone, a Garmin inReach, or another emergency beacon can be your last line when the wilderness closes in. Hope you never need it, but be glad you have it when you do. Off-roading gives freedom, but freedom without caution will have you facing an outdoor disaster. If you've made it this far, please consider clicking those subscribe and like buttons. Want more outdoor disasters content? Check out these videos I believe you'll enjoy. Thank you for watching.